Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Likeable Dentist. My name is Moon and I'm your host.
And my name is Choong. I'm the guest for today, I suppose.
Welcome to this podcast, Choong. Choong and I actually go way back to our university days, which has been probably over a decade by this point, and that is quite a long time. And he's now a father of two children, and I'm still trotting along in my married life. But yeah, so Chun is a registered clinical and sports nutritionist, as well as a personal trainer and health coach. And he's based in New Zealand now with his family. He's been doing it for nearly a decade now, and he loves working with individuals who want to elevate their health and performance through a scientifically based approach, while also understanding that we are all human at the end of the day and that it requires a personalized touch. Currently, Choon works with clients all over the world, and he always values relationships over the perfect plan because coaching is a two-way street, much like any meaningful relationships that we get to build these days. All right, Choon, let's dive into it. I would like to start with asking you the question of what are some evidence-based signs on physical health and mental health and how they are related to each other?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest one that gets kind of thrown around these days, I would say it's probably more looked into in the last 5 to 6 years, ever since COVID was probably the whole idea of cortisol and stress. And I think a lot of people tend to understand that if your mental health isn't necessarily regulated in a decent enough fashion, if you will, generally that causes a lot of stress.
Mhm.
And stress generally drives cortisol level up. And what we tend to find is, particularly when we look at physical health specifically, the body does not necessarily understand what is good stress or bad stress. So it kind of reacts based off just hormonal signals and pathways, right?
Mhm.
And an example would be, let's say, if someone goes and do a workout, someone goes and do like a 5K run or something like that. You feel good in the end, but it's actually a stressor in itself. You're actually putting your body through stress and your body will adapt to the stress. And we tend to view that colloquially as acute stress. So a lot of stress in 30 minutes and comes back down. But with mental health, particularly, the level of stress that your body might experience is not necessarily very acute, unless, of course, if it's a very traumatic event. So I think in the context of work and life, the stress level is quite low level or medium level. It's always in the background. You probably have heard the term like, "Hey, how's your day?" You're like, "Oh yeah, so. How was your week?" It's like, "Oh yeah, standard. A little bit stress here and there." And that kind of like low level stress, if it's not being, I guess, regulated, or if the cortisol level doesn't actually come down, then kind of the individual will start to experience, prolonged exposure to potentially medium levels of cortisol, which can, in some cases, be a little bit detrimental when we look at physical health. Because what we tend to see is when stress is low or when cortisol is low, all the recovery things happen. So better digestion, better sleep quality, better recovery from workouts as well. But if that level doesn't come down, then those good things doesn't happen. So you're kind of always prolonged. And the example I always use is you plan a holiday, you go on a holiday, your stress levels come down significantly, and you come back from the holiday like, oh, I need another holiday. And that's just kind of one of those things because like you're so exposed to low or potentially medium levels of stress, it doesn't come down as in contrast to a hard workout. It goes up, it comes down really, really quickly. That's kind of where we start to see a blend of like, prioritizing mental health a little bit more, because if you don't, then you're always quote unquote not recovering, not necessarily just physically, but also mentally. And that obviously has detrimental things downstream with hormones and health and all that stuff. So yeah, that's kind of like a broad overview.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like we quite often hear the tagline of like healthy body, healthy mind, and it's like a chicken and egg relationship because one
Mm,
affects the other as well. And when we when we exercise, there is some dopamine release,
mm.
right? Which helps us feel happier. And I personally find that if I go out for a long walk, especially in the nature, and I break out in a little bit of a sweat, it actually makes me feel quite happy and I feel energetic. I feel more energetic afterwards, even though I've done some work and burned some calories. And it plays a positive role in my mental health.
Mm.
And I've actually been on a bit of a weight loss journey myself, and I've lost about 6 kilograms in the last 2 months, and that has been done just through consistent exercising and eating
Nice.
little bit less. And I'm not counting calories because I personally don't really enjoy counting calories or doing a lot of meal prep. But you got to put in some work, and we also do like a little food delivery service for our lunches that we take to
Yeah,
work. So
nice.
that just makes things a little bit easier and more streamlined because work can get quite busy, and finding that time to exercise during your work days, it can be a bit challenging. I know for myself, I'm not really much of a morning person, so I tend to go to the gym or go for a walk after work, which has been getting a little bit more difficult now that we are
With
in
the weather
winter.
and yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Welcome to the other side of the world. Our seasons are opposite to
Yep,
those
the
that
opposite.
are in the northern hemisphere. Yep. And my husband is more of a morning person, so he goes to the gym in the morning and gets his work or exercise done then. So yeah, it can look a bit different for everybody, depending on their lifestyle choices and what works for them and what doesn't. So yeah, I think this is an age-old question, but with strength-based training versus cardio, which should I go for? If my goal is to lose some fat and become fitter and feel better overall, or should I do both of them?
Yeah. So on a very broad recommendation, I would say both is going to be ideal.
Mm-hmm.
What is probably more important is I guess the ratios
Yep.
of how you want to do it. This is not evidence based whatsoever, but it's just like a ratio that works for most people. I think like a 2-to-1 ratio works really well. And what I mean by that is like two strength sessions to one cardio session. Or if you think about it in a week, it's basically two sessions of like hard gym work and then one session of like it doesn't have to be in the gym, but going out for a walk, going out for a run, or going out for a swim or something like so. Like a 2-to-1 ratio generally works quite well. To maybe add to that as well, so strength based training is generally really good to help you build muscle. And in most cases, when we look at beyond fat loss, what tends to happen is if you have more muscle mass, you would usually have a higher basal metabolic rate, or some would say, yeah, that basal metabolic rate. Um, Asterisk there because there's context, but generally that's the broad acceptable notion. But one thing that's also very important is that more muscle mass generally also correlates with better metabolic health. So more muscle mass, so muscles are quite glucose sensitive. So you would very rarely find someone who has a lot of muscle. You will very rarely find someone who has a lot of muscle with type 2 diabetes. And someone who might potentially not have a lot of muscle mass and maybe their BMI, again, not always a viable metric, but just something to consider. Um, they might be within range, but they might still be type 2 diabetic because they don't have a lot of muscle. So generally, like having more muscle is good for blood sugar control, metabolic health. So that's something to add. However, cardio is also quite important. And I think we go through phases in fitness. There's the whole like bodybuilding craze in the 80s and the 90s, and then CrossFit sort of came along, and then now it's all about high rocks, like long distance, all that stuff. Cardio definitely has its place, right? Because I think from a very healthy, to your point, healthy and fit perspective, you can be strong and you can look good, but if you can't run because you need to, catch a cab or catch a flight because you overslept, whatever it might be, like, your cardio like gas outs on you, that, it's probably not a very good idea, right? So I think like in that sense, cardio is still going to be quite important. And again, like, we tend to see this quite a lot. Um, I probably wouldn't dive into the nitty gritty of it, but different zones of heart rates also can sometimes correlate with varying degrees of uh, fitness levels, and you kind of want both. And there's all, a can of worms there. But yeah, I would say like 2 to 1. Um, if you have the ability to do more sessions in a week, I would still value strength training. So like maybe like 3 sessions to 1. And honestly, if you're already getting 3 sessions of gym training, like good strength training, and 1 session of cardio, you're probably quite good. And if you can get like a 4 to 1 or even 4 to 2, at that point, you're like, you're working out like 6 days a week. Like, you probably should then consider having a day off on the Sunday. Because again, we previously sort of just talked about it in about a couple of minutes ago with like exposure to the stress is really, really good, but you need to recover. Like your cardio and your muscle gain, that all happens when you sleep. All the benefits happen when you recover. The benefits don't actually happen when you push your body. They're actually, your body's actually breaking down when you push it. So the benefits need to come. And so I think like there's always a inkling feeling of like, oh, I can do more. It's like, yeah, you could totally do more, but there's a point where doing more just becomes, a negative return of investment. So that's something I'll say as well from like a
Mhm.
recovery standpoint.
Yeah, I understand what you mean by strength training, building muscles and all that. Because I think also at the end of the day, muscles do weigh heavier than fats in terms of volume, and having a higher muscular mass. Like, we've seen videos of how 1 kilogram of fat might look like this, but 1 kilogram of muscle is a lot leaner and looks smaller. So that brings me to my next question, which is, how often should you weigh yourself? And, if, like you said before, that BMI is one of the metrics to
Mm.
measure one's health status, but it is not the only thing, because someone who's extremely muscular, like a bodybuilder, might have a very high BMI, but they're not necessarily unhealthy. So,
Ooh.
yeah,
I will actually push back on that, and I think
okay.
like that, and I think that's quite interesting. So we have to sort of look at it within the context of like what would healthy mean, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think like and this is something I've come to terms with. If we actually look at a lot of the high level top tier athletes in the world, maybe even outside of bodybuilding, we look at CrossFit, we look at MMA, we look at, football, basketball, rugby, whatever it might be, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
these people are, pushing their body quite hard. They literally get paid to do what they do. And I think to, ironically, that initial conversation about the whole stress thing, their whole job is to like train and de-stress as hard as they can, right?
Yes.
So it comes a point, funnily enough, athletes are not actually the healthiest people in the world, because like there's it's like a bell curve. It's like generally you kind of want to be in the middle, right? Like that's like the good point of healthy. Everyone on the left is basically like people who don't do any exercise. They eat really bad and they don't do anything, like, like bad poor health markers. But you've got people on the other end, of the bell curve, who are like literally pushing the body to the extremes. And like, if you ask like any professional athlete, "Ooh, how are you feeling?" It's like, like some niggles here and there. Like bodybuilders are notorious for having sleep apnea because they're just so big. So their chest is basically like constricting their airways, or their I guess their trachea. So like, or actually their nasal passage. So they have to use like a CPAP to sleep.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's kind of where, to your question, like BMI is not necessarily a good metric to measure how healthy you are, but it's probably a good indicator to say like, well, like how like it's one marker, right? Because if someone's BMI is extremely high, whilst they could be very healthy from a biomarker perspective, and um, the I guess the nomenclature of biomarker would be blood work. So if they do their blood work's all good, but if their BMI is really high, sometimes like just people who are big just have a trouble breathing, and it's a thing. It's a thing. Like just big people. If you're listening to this, you're 6'6", you're 120, 130, or American, maybe you're over 300 pounds kind of thing, but you're really lean. Breathing is hard, man. You're a big person. It's hard to breathe. So BMI can kind of at least give you a bit of an understanding there.
Mm-hmm.
So how often should you weigh yourself? I think it really depends. We sort of talked a little bit about mental health as well, and I think like the important part with like weight, I think the understanding of that has probably grown substantially over last couple of years. Um, if you are someone who weighs yourself and you sort of look at the number and associate the number with your well being, and like who you are as a person, like you step on the scale, you're like I'm 100 kilos, and like like when you see the three digits, you're like, oh my god, like you associate that number with your internal well being kind of thing. Like I'm 100 kilos, like that's where I would say like what, like you probably don't want to be weighing yourself too frequently, because like a number's just a number, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I work in the health and fitness industry, but look, like it doesn't matter if you want to get healthy or not. Yeah, some people think like if they are unhealthy and they're heavy, people are not gonna like them the same. And I think like you're probably very far away from the truth, because like people don't really care for the most part. People will support you if you want to be healthy for sure, but I think like good friends and good family members, yeah, they don't really care like how heavy you are, man. So honestly, like if you weigh yourself and you have a very deep association with weight with your sort of internal well-being, then I would probably suggest don't. However, if you are saying like, okay, like I get it, but I really want to get down to this weight, it's a goal of mine, and I can manage the mental side of things, I would say like 3 times a week is probably ideal. Not for the reasons of the weight, but over time. We're looking at the trend line over time. Because some days you'll be heavier, some days you'll be lighter. You might have a late dinner, you might have not a lot of water the day before, you might be on your period for females. So like your weight's going to fluctuate quite a lot. But if you have those 3 points across, let's say 16 or 20 weeks, then you kind of see like, all right, like, am I on track? So that's probably one. Alongside that, which is probably my favorite one, is going to be progress pictures. And I think progress pictures says a lot about a person, because if someone doesn't want to take progress pictures when they're attempting, let's say, a fat loss kind of situation, it shows a lot, and not in a good or bad way. It's like you are not just you're not comfortable looking at yourself. So there's a lot of it. There's like a deep seated stuff that you probably will need to kind of like talk to a specialist about, right? Because like every day you take a shower. I'm assuming everyone takes a shower. You go in, you take off your clothes. Very likely in your shower there's a mirror, right? Like if you don't like to look at yourself, like, and maybe like for whatever reason it's you just don't like the way you look, and you just don't want to accept the fact, then yeah, I mean, like that's why I think progress pictures are great in that sense, because if you make yourself take a progress picture and you are faced with the reality of, okay, this is how I look very objectively, and you take one again in 4 weeks, your weight might not actually change, but you might, to your point, gain muscle and lose fat. And then, your net weight's like, maybe -1. You're like, in 4 weeks, I've been trying so hard, -1. But then you look at progress pictures, you're like, oh, shit, actually, I look quite different. So I'm actually a big fan of progress pictures, because it gives a much more accurate representation to what I would probably think most people want when it comes to weight loss. It's not about the weight, it's about how you look. And so if it's about how you look, take some progress pictures. The weight's great, but most cases I would say like 90-80% of the people who are not professional athletes who need to make weight, it's not about how much you weigh, it's about how you look, generally speaking. And so progress pictures is definitely a very easy way to track your progress. You take a
Yep.
picture, you don't need any professional help, literally just click and then, store it somewhere safe and take once every 4 weeks. And yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
would say.
I've received feedback from the people that I work
Mm.
with that I look like I've lost weight, and my, uniform, my scrubs look a fair bit looser
Like Lucia, yeah,
on
yeah.
me than they used to be. And especially when I do change into like a tighter fitting
Mm.
shirt for lunch breaks and stuff, people make comments about me looking like I've lost weight, and it is really encouraging. And I
100%.
think part one very important reason on how I achieved this progress in the last 2 months is that I had accountability partners. I literally not only have one accountability partner, but I have my dad, my personal trainer, a coach of mine, and also a couple of friends. So I think I have 4 to 5
Yeah,
accountability
nice.
partners so that every day, when at the end of the day, when I've hit my exercise goal or done my steps, I take a screenshot of my health app. I think most people have a health app of some sort on their
Some sort,
phone
yeah.
these days. And I just send it to them. And it's really encouraging to see that I'm sort of, ticking those boxes every day consistently, and it helps me stay accountable and stay motivated, because we get hard days, for XYZ reason. You just have a day that you feel like you really don't feel like doing it. But most of us, I mean, not most of us, but some of us are a little bit like a people pleaser, and we'd rather do it for someone else because um, we've agreed to do this. And if we don't do it, we're letting that someone down rather than letting ourselves down. So I think that's almost like a trick that you can play on your mind to stay a bit more consistent and a bit more like you show up and do your work even though you may not feel like doing it, right, when it comes to exercise. But once you get into the momentum, I think building momentum is another big one. So once you have that momentum and your body is starting to get used to this level of activity that it wasn't used to before, that helps with getting things going and gaining traction as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think like one thing you said there so was quite interesting because like there's obviously the whole talk about like intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. And to your point, like some people are just people pleasers, and usually, having accountability partners is definitely a very, very good way. And um, like being someone who is a coach, I understand why I would also hire a coach, right? Because it's like I coach people to try to understand intrinsic factors, but me myself, it's like, I just want someone there to kind of like poke me every once in a while. It's like, hey, like, what are you doing? You're like, all right, I'll go do the thing that I said I was gonna do, right? Um, and that definitely helps a lot with consistency for sure, because in the end of the day, like when you like to your point, like when the going gets tough, it's funny because I literally had a client who told me this on Monday when I was seeing him in the gym. He was like, there's a reason why I pay you. It's not really big. Like obviously, I would like to think he said that I was good about that, but one of the things he said was like, yeah, like I need to show up. And I don't want to be that guy that texts you 5 minutes before a session to say, oh, like I can't come in because I slept in. And the reality is that a lot of people can kind of talk about like, have the drive to wake up and get it done. It's like, yeah, like some people have that ability to build a very, very deep and large intrinsic motivator in them. And ironically, I know you introduced me at the start, but I think one of the big things is like when you become a parent, like it's very apparent where the intrinsic motivator will come from. Like you just got to get it done. Like you don't really have an excuse. It's almost like someone's relying on you, but this is not just someone who you're going to be paying. It's like if like you're literally responsible for this person's well-being, right? Um, and I think that really helps. Accountability partners are great, especially when you hit a plateau. Because I think like when you hit a plateau, a lot of people don't necessarily understand. Like it's easy for me to sit here and say, "Oh, I've hit a plateau," But then, if you've got your coach, like yourself, Moon, your personal trainer, your friends and stuff like that, and they'd say, oh, like you think you've hit a plateau, but honestly, you look a lot better than what it was before. You look at the progress pictures, like they can get you over that line, over that plateau. And I think that's a very good thing to have, like a community behind you. I think that's an important thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, Chun, I know you work with a lot of busy professionals that have very big work weeks. A majority of our listeners are actually people who are younger dentists or younger radiographers, and they work in the healthcare industry. So, what are some suggestions that you might have when it comes to balancing a work life balance with staying active?
So basically, like, there's a bit of a framework that I use, which is 4 C's. The first one's kind of like catalyst, which is like C, and sort of what we talked about with like having a very intrinsic motivator to, I guess, kind of understand like why you want to be healthy. And again, like I do believe there are people out there who genuinely don't really care about their health, and that is okay. But if you are someone who wants to make an improvement in your health, you really need to understand like why. Like not just like, oh, I need to lose weight because my doctor told me so. In this day and age, like a lot of people don't listen to their doctors anyway. You know what I mean? So like the first very important thing is like, what's the catalyst that's driving you forward, right? Because if you don't understand why you want to be healthy, I think like it doesn't matter if you're a busy person or not, you're never going to do anything. You know what I mean? Like it's not going to be there. The second C is probably something a lot of people get wrong, especially for busy individuals, is they try to look for like the best calculative plan approach to improve whatever they're trying to improve. That's actually the third step. The second step is actually really what are you capable of doing? And so something I always say, like, okay, in a perfect world, you need to hit 4 exercise sessions a week. Each session will last about 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even 45 to 90 minutes. And then the person goes, okay, that's great, but I don't have the time. I literally don't have the time. And it's true. I used to think that everyone has the same 24 hours, everyone has the same seven days of a week, and I used to say, yeah, you got to make do. Yeah, like after a bit of debilitating and some soul searching, you're like, you know what, that's not actually quite true because, for example, my wife Claire, like she's a full time mum. It's a full time job, literally. It is a full time job. And a full time job is not a 40-hour work week. We're talking 7 days on. You know what I mean? Like full time mumming, 7 days on. Telling someone who is a full time mum, again, I understand professionals, I'll get to that in a little bit. Telling a full time mum to say you need to work out 4 to 5 times a week to lose your post pregnancy pouch, it's not going to happen. Full stop. It's not. Especially if you've got kids that don't go to kindy or don't go to daycare, like it's just not going to happen. And so I think for professionals, you have to understand like what is within your capability. Like where can you find time to get a workout in? Because even within the workout context, there's ways you can design a program to get the most out of, let's say, 30 minutes or an hour, right?
Uh-huh.
So I think like you need to really understand where your capabilities. It doesn't have to be 4 or 6. It could just be 1, 2. You know, start small. Like get very low ball with it, and that extends to nutrition as well. I started working with a client as of this recording. I started working with a client last week, this week, and one of the things that this person said was that the previous nutritionist told this person that sugar is extremely bad for you, and it's like almost demonizing sugar, right? And basically led this person to have a situation in the head where anytime this person walks into, like, this person's just very afraid to walk into a supermarket because all this person sees as she walks in is like sugar, 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 sugar. But I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true. And so some people would look at this and go, okay, like, give her a meal plan, which you could. But then I kind of ask her, like, what are you capable of doing? And so basically, like, what we settled with was like, just eat some fruits. Like basically she doesn't eat at all, but she workouts a lot, but she doesn't actually eat. So again, some clinical symptoms there. But point being, like, you can't just force something that's perfect down the throat of someone if they can't do it. Because if they're so sick of looking at food, you can't just say eat food. You know what I mean? Like some people just don't want to eat food because they're sick of looking at food, and you can't just say, "Oh, you need to eat 4 times a day." It's like that's not going to happen. Like just tell them like, "All right, what do you think you can do?" Like, "Oh yeah, eat fruit." Okay, cool. And then you get the perfect plan. You calculate the perfect plan based off what you're capable of doing, and then you kind of just capitalize on things which you brought up, Moon, which was just making sure you're momentum, right? Like you stack some wins, this week, great, like I had a piece of fruit, cool. Next week, I have 2 pieces of fruit, yes. Then week after, I had 3 liters of water and 2 pieces of fruit, yes. Oh my God, I had my first lunch in 5 years. I never had lunch for 5 years, yes. And then I got my first workout in the last 5 years, great. And you kind of like slowly capitalize on like the small things, and then yeah, you start to build momentum from there. So that's kind of how I would approach it for not just busy people in general, but just anyone in general. Like think about it in that regard, especially like what you're capable of doing.
Okay, that's excellent advice. And I personally use the Qantas Wellbeing app, which allows you to earn a few points of Qantas points here and there by
Oh
meeting
yes.
your step goals, daily or weekly kind of thing. And I think that's a little extra incentive to keep you motivated. And then you can also add your friends on the app and sort of see where you are at on a ladder of competition, like a bit of healthy, friendly competition between you and your friends.
Oh.
Could also go an extra mile in motivating you. And I think with a lot of fundraiser these days, it they associate like the push-up challenge or walk for mental health,
Mm-hmm.
however many kms in a given month to raise funds for good causes. So I think there's a lot of help and external resources out there that we can tap into.
Yeah.
Even if we don't necessarily have the funding to get a coach, like obviously that will be ideal if you can have a personalized tailored plan for you. And every coach or every personal trainer have different belief systems of their own, and based on their experience and their training, they might suggest different things, like with your client and their previous nutritionist. I think it's the same for dentistry as well, because every individual is different. The food they eat, their chewing habits, and what they believe in terms of taking risks, and what they're willing to do is very different for everybody. So I think when it tying back to the whole communication part,
Mm.
understanding what drives your patient and understanding what matters to them, like finding out their why, is very, very important and
Mm-mm-mm.
crucial. So I used to sort of have a template of things that I used to say to patients, but I've since done away with the template side of things, because I realized that the same sentence is not going to have the same impact on the individual. And you really have to speak their language per se, something that appeals to them,
Mm.
something that sounds motivational to them, in order to, let the words sink in a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Hmm. All right. So if you could give one piece of suggestion or advice to our listeners, coming from your background and all the life lessons that you've learned so far in your life, what would that be?
One piece of advice.
Yeah.
One, boy, that's a one singular. Jeez, they put me on the spot. Um, I would say just be present. I
Uh-huh.
think a lot of people tend to either get anxiety driven situations where they worry about what's going to happen,
Uh-huh.
or some would be very deep seated in their past and finding a way to get out of traumatic experiences, which is obviously all very valid. But I think like if you're able to just sort of be a little bit more present, be kind of in the moment, um, generally that would be the best approach, right? because in the end of the day, like life moves forward whether you like it or not, and you're going to experience things whether you like it or not. And it's obviously then up to you and whether you decide to whether you want to take part in the experience or not, because tomorrow is never guaranteed. And I think like if you can kind of understand that and just be a bit more present from your day to day, that's probably the best advice I can give. Like that's probably an advice that I generally live by, uh, very much so on a daily basis as well.
Hmm. I think there was a philosopher, I just can't remember his name now. It might be Confucius. But he says, this is a long time ago now. He says, people who live in the past are grumpy. People who live in the future are anxious. And people who live in the present are at peace with themselves. And I
Yeah,
think that
I'd
really
agree.
ties
100%.
into, yeah, what you just said.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely know some people who are like that. I'm like, nah, just gotta chill, man. Just live in the moment.
Yeah. All right, awesome. So if you wanted to get in touch with Chun or look at potentially working with him or just getting some help if you hit a um, barrier or whatever that challenges that you might face in terms of health and fitness, we'll leave some contact information down in the show description below. And like always, if you have any questions or comments or topics that you would like us to talk about on the Likeable Dentist podcast, you can shoot us an email or send us a direct message at info@thelikeabledentist.com.au, or you can visit our website and send us a direct message at www.thelikeabledentist.com.au. And we'll see you in the next episode. We hope you have a lovely day. Bye.